Welcome, everyone. My name is Wayne Combs. I am your aasp president, and I cannot tell you I've been dreaming of this moment where I could look out and see people in the room, in a room that we are all within. And while I know that we are all feeling different levels of comfort, hopefully you found a little sticker that works for you. Green, yellow, or red. I chose green. That means you can, if you want to touch me, you can touch me. It's all right. Or hugs, but that's like another level, right? You know, the green I notice is like shaking hands and fist bumps and stuff. But they don't have the hug. Would that be purple or something? Like, come all the way in? But I want to thank you for making the journey and making this a priority, because I know that we are all dealing with different levels of social comfort. And for some of you, this is the apex for you so far. And we are well aware of that. And of course, a lot of thought and sensitivity went into determining how to do this in a way that we know would be comfortable for you all, but would also allow us to break through and engage in ways that we've been waiting to for a long time. I want to thank all of you who have attended our virtual conferences, our summits over the last 2 years. They've been great. They've been fun. I think we've done good work there, certainly shown that it can be done. But we also know that engaging in thoughtful conversation, strategic thinking, interrogating processes, and ideating is something that works much better in person and allows us to have longer conversations and deeper, richer conversations and spontaneous conversations, right? You remember when I called it the in-betweens? Well, this is just one big in-between that we get to participate in for the next couple of days. So I would like to begin by welcoming or introducing our capstone sponsor, UC Innovation.
Hi, welcome to aasp Summit. I'm George Wu, COO of UC Innovation. Here at UC Innovation, our sole mission is to provide the most comprehensive advancement in constituent engagement solutions built on Salesforce, and we call it Ascend. That's why we're so excited to be supporting aasp Summit again, this time as a capstone sponsor, and we're all going to be in person. In the next few days, you'll be participating in sessions that will spark ideas on how to optimize your advancement operations, as well as learn new technologies and products. And we hope you'll join our Tuesday sponsorship track, where advancement leaders Michael Carter, Bonnie Hubbard, Chris Spire, and Rob Jones will be taking you behind the scenes on how to implement Ascend. And please stop by our booth, where we'll have real-time demos on the power of Ascend, as well as introduce our latest offering, Ascend AI, that takes predictive modeling and engagement to another level. So we hope you have a great summit. Look forward to seeing everyone in person. Thanks.
On behalf of the board, we welcome you to the kickoff of our summit this year. It's really an opportunity for us to come together with you all and, as you know, to share and learn. Our pathways to the future, excite, transform, and lead. We're always considering how we can best frame a theme, and certainly all of the presentations reflect outstanding content that I know that you will all learn a great deal by, and then of course in the in-betweens. First, I want to say thank you to the pre-conference workshop sessions. I don't know that if you had a chance to attend them, but they continue to grow in shape over the years. This is something that we started several years ago, but I believe that we have continued to think about new ways that we can use your morning, because we don't want to leave you feeling like you didn't get enough. So now unless you're out on Bourbon Street already in the morning, we have something for you. Or maybe recovering from Bourbon Street last night, right? So I want to thank Navigate data analytics and business intelligence, gift administration, and our new session called, Elevate. And then I want to go back and I want to just introduce our new session, Navigate. And I don't know, how many of you got to attend Navigate this morning? So really an opportunity for us to engage people coming to Summit for the first time. The brainchild of our great Jessica Laborde, our director of Summit. And really just, I think it was a great opportunity for people to get to know a little bit of an orientation before they join this crazy world that we have been involved with, some of us, for many, many years. So hopefully if you did not attend this year, that you'll consider it next year, and there will be a next year. So, each year we come together at this time, like I said earlier, to think about how we can grow and learn and advance in our ability to support our organizations and their missions. I don't think we could count, we would be in the thousands of years if we counted all the decades of experience in the room. But certainly, there are individuals in the room that range clear up to 30 plus, maybe almost 40 years of experience. And then we have people coming into the field for the first time, and we love that. We want to continue to advance this profession and expand its meaning and value in our organizations. We know that it's important for us to be at the decision-making table. And we do that best when we come together and we leverage our combined resources, our combined abilities to show that we are an important asset to our organizations. And we know that. Sometimes we have to remind them. At this point, I would like to take a few moments to, of course, thank all the work that went into Summit. So I'm just going to read a few names. There are many, many individuals that have touched Summit and made it what it is today. But I want to start with our program committee, chaired by Meg Padavani and Brennan Haddon. Please stand for just a quick second so that we can appreciate and value the work that you've done. I think one thing that you'll notice is that we continue to evolve. We can't help ourselves, right? We don't sit still because our work doesn't sit still. And the program really reflects an evolution of how we have defined presentations and educational opportunities for Summit since 2008. That was the first live Summit, 2008, when we would call friends to get people to present. Will you come and present for our Summit? It's brand new. And look where we are today. So thank you, Meg and Brennan, for continuing to take the charge on that and develop outstanding programming for us. Very diverse, varied programming. Also want to thank the Summit Logistics Committee. It's comprised of many committee representations. They do the heavy lifting all year round. I will tell you, we will finish, they will debrief, and they will begin on next year's. Of course, I cannot comment on the Logistics Committee without commenting on the leadership of that committee, and that is Jessica Laborde, our Vice President, Director of Summit. Jessica? Again, I want to thank all the committees and volunteers throughout the year that enable us to position ourselves to make this a reality. And certainly this year, it was a little bit, I have to say, getting back into the in-person mode from 2 virtuals, I mean, that's a different kind of experience. But true to our nature as a profession, we are resourceful, we are adaptable, we are resilient, we are nimble. Should I keep going? Because that's what we are. And that was demonstrated this year in putting on this first in-person summit after several years apart. Next, I would like to do, of course, I'm going to thank our amazing sponsors. There's a full list in the program and in the mobile app. We'll talk about that if you haven't connected to the mobile app yet for details on our sponsors. But just take a look at that. Take a look at all of those sponsors. These are the people, or these are the providers that work with you throughout the year to make our operations, to support our mission and to make our lives better. Sponsors tell us that Summit offers the best opportunity for them to connect with you. So, you may not be thinking about a new peer-to-peer platform, or you might not be thinking about a new app, or help us, you may not be thinking about a new CRM, but you might be. And we are all here to support you. But if you are, please connect with our sponsors and engage them over the next several days. They have done the investment and the work, but most importantly, they have collected the best practices and the solutions across our industry. And I think that's something that we oftentimes don't have access to. You could have a best practice, you could have a peer that you call every once in a while to find out what a best practice could be. But these are folks that address this on a large scale and on multiple scale. Next, so a little round of applause for our sponsors. Hopefully there's some in the room. I know they're getting everything ready for that space because that's going to be the space. You guys, I hope you know, the exhibit hall will be the space where you want to take a time out. So, in line with that, I also want to introduce our exhibitors. Another round of applause. So, all the networking breaks and some of the fun activities you have heard about, bark, bark, will be in the exhibitor space. That's the St. Charles room. So when there's networking opportunities and you need just a break from all of the mental energy that you'll be putting forth and all the engagement, you can go in there and you'll have some opportunities for refreshments and activities, but also maybe you'll be able to find a few solutions to some of the challenges and the issues that you're facing in your organizations. So please spend some time engaging and learning from our exhibitors as well. All right, next. Well, I was gonna say if you haven't figured it out already, but that's impossible with a group like this. How could we live without Wi-Fi? Does anybody not know the Wi-Fi password? Well, if you haven't, you found a hotspot or some other way to do it. But we do offer a Wi-Fi connection, so check that out. It's Hilton Meetings, and then ASP2. Now, the other one is the mobile app. How many of you have downloaded the mobile app and are using it now? Many of you. So, a couple of key points about the mobile app. One, you'll get it through EventMobi. There's some instructions here. Let's see. And the password is ASP22. All the details, push notifications and stuff, and you know there will be, you will get through the app. There are a couple of changes in the printed program because it's in print. You know, the minute you put it in print, we all know that. How many of you guys have done a printed honor roll lately? Never. Never will we do that again until the next CDO comes in and says he has to have a printed program. But please go to the mobile app for the most accurate, up-to-date information on everything. Also, that's where you're going to be able to play exhibitor bingo. And I would definitely suggest playing exhibitor bingo. You will have a chance to win AirPods provided by Blackbaud, a swag bag with an Amazon gift card provided by UCI, and from AASP, noise-canceling headphones, which, never go out of style. There's always a use for that. Every airplane, you could have it on the way back on your airplane ride, right? Let's see. So that's the mobile app. Any questions on that? All right, let's go. I don't have to do all the housekeeping today. Okay. Next, things to remember. We want you to evaluate us, right? So make sure that you do evaluate the sessions in the mobile app. Get social with our hashtag AASP22. We've got Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn as options too, so you can really engage in expanding this great world that we have with each other and the outside world. And let's see, connect with your committees also. As you head into the Summit exhibitor space, there will be a members services table. So you can get information on volunteer opportunities, committees that you might want to consider. We'll go through those tomorrow at the business meeting, but there's lots of opportunities to volunteer and get engaged in ASP and learn from each other. One of the best stomping grounds for that are the best practices subcommittees. If you have an area of interest that you are particularly fond of, those subcommittees love participation. They're always welcoming you, so I'll put a plug in for them. And then don't forget all the networking breaks, which I've already mentioned, and refreshments in the St. Charles room. And as you have probably heard, there will be puppies there tomorrow. I hope you have puppies. I know I already got asked about the cat lounge, and I think we'll work on it. They're not as easy to coordinate as puppies, so I had to think about bunnies. Yeah, there's lots of options. I had no idea. I don't know about the reptile room, though. That's a special kind of experience. Next, do I go next? Yeah. Next is the President's Reception. So we have a great President's Reception planned for you tonight. It is in the Riverport Starboard in the Riverside Building. Who knows where that is? That is very good. All board members. So what I will say, I've been told, is you can go to the lobby and there will be ASP staff and directions to help you get there. They're also going to do a push notification for directions through the app. But if nothing else, we will all converge on the lobby and they will have to just deal with us, right? And we'll get there. A couple of things, of course, refreshments, food, we got to have a photo booth in New Orleans, right? We'll always have a photo booth, but I'm sure this one will be very festive in a way that will encourage us to maybe let down our hair or let down whatever and have a little bit of fun. Of course, there will be refreshments, alcoholic refreshments to help you if that is, helpful. But I want to tell you that we are going to have a live jazz band. Yes, Blue Rose Music Group is going to be performing for us. I want to thank Dwight Dozier on our board for making this happen. Dwight, can you please raise? Thank you, Dwight. We knew immediately if we just had a DJ or something that might not meet the expectations of our amazing membership. So Dwight stepped in and did the heavy lifting on that. All right, let's get on with the show. I would like to now ask Chris Crackler from our premier sponsor, Blackbaud, to come to the stage.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you all the AASP staff members, volunteers, board members, everyone that has made this event possible. It's great to be here in person. So I am Chris Crackler. I'm the president and general manager of Blackbaud's higher education group. We are proud to be a longtime partner of AASP. Wayne and I were chatting about that just before the show. And we're honored to be the premier sponsor for this event. As I look out in the audience, I'm honored and I'm humbled to see so many Blackbaud customers here, and we're grateful for the important work you do in the higher education, nonprofit, and overall philanthropic communities. That's what it's all about, the impact that you all have. As I look at the agenda and the session schedule, there's some great industry experts and thought leaders, and there's a lot of really exciting things happening this week. I've got a lot of sessions earmarked that I can't wait to get to. Blackbaud also, we've got an exhibit booth. We've got an innovation room. So if you get a chance, come by. We've got some great innovations using artificial intelligence, machine learning, analytics, data visualization, integration engines that make it easy to exchange data, all things to help you be more successful in your jobs. And last, hopefully I get to meet as many of you as possible in this virtual world that we're coming out of. I'm seeing faces that I've met on Zoom and Teams, but it's always great to meet people in person. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Jodi Ann Burry, the keynote speaker. She has a mission to disrupt business as usual, to achieve social change. She's a sought-after speaker and writer who works at the intersections of race, culture, and health equity. Her TED Talk, The Myth of Bringing Your Full Authentic Self to Work, embodies her disruption of traditional narratives about racism and work. Jodi Ann is also the creator and host of Black Cancer, a podcast about the lives of people of color told through their cancer journeys. Jodi Ann holds a master's in public health from the University of Michigan. She prides herself on being a cool auntie, a twist-out queen, a health advocate, an adventurer, a reluctant dog owner, and Jodi Ann is currently working on her first book. So Jodi Ann.
Hello, hello. Hello? Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I have not been to New Orleans in maybe 8+ years. And so it's wonderful to be back in this gorgeous city. It's wonderful to feel humidity. I've been living in Seattle for 8 years. And it's wonderful to see all of you. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the warm welcome and response. I'm really excited for our conversation today. So we are going to talk about authenticity in the workplace. And before we even get to that, I do want to acknowledge, as many of you all know, COVID-19 is still a risk, and I just want everyone here to be as safe as you can and that your loved ones back wherever you are safe as we navigate towards this new normal. I feel like, we've talked about being in between, and it still feels like that for a lot of us. So, I think that's where I want to ground our conversation today as we get into talking about authenticity in the workplace, is how to set like a new normal about what it means to be authentic, what it means to bring your full authentic self to work, how we understand that concept and give that a little bit more nuance and meaning, and most importantly, to create the kind of work culture where people can truly, truly bring their authentic selves, and we can mean that. So I always like to bring in Maya Angelou into the room before I do anything. She's so formative to my intellectual and personal development. If you haven't read her work, I strongly advise it. I'm sure for many of you who love her are already thinking about your own favorite quotations and her works that were impactful to you, but this one is mine, where she says that, my mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style. And so that is the energy that I want to bring into this conversation today. And I think that's also what we want for our organizations and for our work, right? That everyone, regardless of their identities, that they have the opportunity to thrive. And the work that you all do and that your roles are connected to, that's even more critically important. There are a lot of people depending on your expertise. And so when we think about this idea of bringing your full authentic self to work, who here has heard that concept before? Maybe you yourself have encouraged people, I want you to be authentic here, right? And so when we think about thriving, I think organizations use this language around bringing your whole self, bringing your full self, bringing your full authenticity to the workplace, right, is a way that we can encourage a way for people to really thrive in their professional environments, right? And so when I was thinking about this concept, because people are say this to me all the time, and I'm a classic millennial, so I've had like 7 different careers, and so anytime you enter a new organization or a new industry, they're like, bring your full authenticity, and I'm like, are you lying? Because the last people were kind of lying about that, so just let me know, right? What is it like here? And so I was trying to figure out, like, how can I express the tensions behind that? To hear this idea of, being authentic at work and wanting that, and then feeling like, wait, did you want that? I've had that so many times, and I was just trying to figure out, how do you express that to someone who maybe hasn't experienced that, or who has experienced it, but like me, are kind of struggling for the language to describe that. And so a few years ago, I had the opportunity to deliver my thoughts on this on the TEDx Seattle stage, and in the process of preparing for that, was still trying to find like that nugget, like, how do you express this thing? And I came up with this analogy, so for those who haven't seen the TED Talk, I will catch you up on it, and I think that'll be a good place to make sure we're all on the same page around this tension between this identity, or this idea around being authentic. Okay, are you ready? Is your mind open for the visualization activity? Okay, thank you, great. Okay, so I want you to imagine this. Kind of hanging out all day, your friend calls you, and they invite you to a party this weekend, right? I'm down. You look on the calendar, and you're like, man, it's Halloween, right? And so you're on the phone with your friend, and you're just trying to confirm, what is the vibe here, right? Like, should I wear a costume? You kind of made it seem like it was just a small gathering. And your friend's like, listen, it just happens to be Halloween that day. You do not have to worry about getting a costume. It is not a big deal. Just a couple of folks, right? Come as you are. Now, how many people here who celebrate Halloween? I don't, but I imagine that people who do have just like a section of their closet filled with all these costumes, right? And so to not have to add one more, I'm good with that, right? And so you get all excited. Whatever you had on that day, that afternoon when you're running errands, you're like, you know what, this is fine, right? And so you wear something like, I imagine myself to be in something similar to like a Kelly Rowland, Casual, cute, clean, good lines, fashionable, appropriate for a small gathering at a friend's house, right, with a couple of friends. So that's what I show up in, right? Go to this party, knock on the door, your friend opens the door. Your friend is dressed like this. It's a little awkward, right? And so not only is your friend in a full-on costume, but you step into the house, every single person is wearing a costume. And now they're looking at you like, so you didn't have time? Right? You're the one who's the odd one out when you were just doing what you were told to come as you are. I mean, you look good, right? But you came as you are, expecting to be comfortable, expecting to really match the vibe of that environment, and even the person who invited you deceived you, right? Full-on costume, everyone else is wearing a costume. And so, like I imagine Halloween parties to be, there's like costume-related conversations, costume-related, like a costume contest, for example, right? Everyone's collecting votes, who wore it best, who's really in the Halloween spirit. And do you get any votes? No. You're not in the costume, unless you're going for casual, right? And so you cannot even participate in the fundamental aspects of this party because you are out of costume when you did not expect to be out of costume because you were told to come as you are. This is mortifying. I could not imagine being in that type of situation. Maybe that's why I don't celebrate Halloween. So that kind of tension, right, that feeling there of feeling like an outsider, right, when you did exactly what you were told to do, right, and now you're the one who doesn't belong, right? Not being able to participate in the fullness of that experience, right? And being yourself, coming as you are in a place that doesn't reward that, right? There are all these kind of structural behaviors around your exclusion. You know, in that story, how you showed up, what gets erased is the fact that you were doing what you were told, but that gets erased because the culture, the dominant culture of that party is to be in a costume, right? And I think if I were to push this analogy a little bit further, sometimes when you're outside of the norms of that environment, you get pushed out. So maybe you get kicked out of the party, right? Which would be horrible, but if I were to extend the analogy, that would be that extension. And so this kind of dynamic, to me, sounds like and feels like when someone says, bring your full, authentic self to work, right? And so it sounds like this, right? This promise of this full authenticity. You know, we want people of color to feel like they belong here. We are looking for passionate people who can bring a fresh perspective to challenge our way of thinking. Our diversity is our strength. You know, just come as you are. Anyone heard some version of this in your workplace, right? And so to believe that, right, we could stop straightening our hair, we can bring our same-sex partners to the holiday party, we could talk about our children or the work of taking care of our aging parents, we could disclose our disabilities when we request the accommodations that we need. Even beyond our identities, right? We want to bring our authenticity into our work styles, especially for the ladies in the room, advocating for yourself when you're interrupted, as women are disproportionately interrupted in their professional lives, calling out the ways that we can hold ourselves accountable to our mission. We want to be authentic in our working styles by asking challenging questions, advocating for growth opportunities for ourselves and others, you know, and pushing back against business as usual, right? That is a way to work authentically. And we may do this despite knowing that coming just as we are, when we are the first, the only, the different, or one of the few, can be really risky, right? But we do this because, you know, we feel like maybe this is the place, right, that I can really bring my full, authentic self to work, like they said. But when we do, when we show up to the party by coming just as we are, what they can also say is you need to work on being more of a team player. Your approach makes it difficult to work with you. You should try to help others feel more comfortable around you. You are hurting your relationships at work when you talk about racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, disability, things like that. And so what is the costume contest? What is that analogous to in our professional lives? Our promotions, mentors, sponsors, the raise that you've been wanting and deserve, the stretch projects, the reputational capital, you know, all these things that we're competing for in our companies, right? Sometimes you just don't get to participate. You cannot compete in a costume contest without a costume and expect to win. And so I shared this story with a friend once about how I was entering a new organization. I get the spiel about bringing your full authentic self here. And we're just in discussion about that. And she just interrupted me, right? She said, listen, you know they don't mean that, right? there's this idea that being authentic, it's so aspirational, it's so seductive, and then you realize it's so imprecise. Like, what does that actually mean? And so what you mean it to mean may not be what the organization means it to mean. And so then you get things like diversity, right? We want your difference, but not your influence, okay? We want your difference, but we're not willing to hold ourselves accountable to protecting that difference, right? And then soon enough, diversity isn't really diversity at all, because we want your difference, but can you be like less different, right? You know, you have a beautiful name, but it's hard to say, so can I call you something else? Oh, thank you so much for telling me about your disability, but can we not talk about it? Oh my God, your kids are so cute. I don't really care why you have to leave work early, right? Can you stay a couple extra hours, right? Love your questions, love your ideas, but can you not ask your questions during the meeting? Just send it over email instead, right? And so when this is the reality for so many professionals of color, so many women, so many people who face chronic discrimination and bias in the workplace today, and yes, in mission-driven nonprofit work, right? What does this do to the workplace culture? And so this creates what I like to call the authenticity gap, right? The authenticity gap is the distance between what you say and what you do, right? And there are two main ways that I can see that gap kind of play out in the workplace culture. So we can think about the authenticity gap, right, in terms of how individuals express themselves, the distance between our intentions for inclusion, right, and the impact of those actions. And so in this scenario, right, the company or organization doesn't feel like a safe space to fully express your identity and your working style, right? And so what ends up making me different shoulders, right, the work for the organization's inclusion initiatives, but without the structural changes needed to protect me from the repercussions, right? So the same repercussions we just talked about. That's how you can create an authenticity gap in the employee experience. Organizations can also create an authenticity gap in the organization's mission, right? And so there's a distance between your purpose, the purpose of your work, right, and the process. And so in this scenario, organizations aren't as honest as they could be about who they are and how they work. And I think this is really distinctive in nonprofits, you know, mission-driven organizations, philanthropy, et cetera, because there's such an ethos of goodwill, right, a drive to do good work. But the focus on doing good ends up creating a new problem, right, a different kind of authenticity gap, where you focus more on doing good than creating good, right? And so what does this look like? I've worked in a number of nonprofit spaces. First couple of jobs that I had were in the charter school world, and I've seen this, right? You have this mission to educate low-income students, right, or students from low-income areas with new charter schools, right? Primary focus is on education. But then you create uniform policies that can send kids home in the middle of the day if they're just slightly out of uniform. I have seen kids sent home for not having a belt or the wrong color shoes or not having an undershirt. That was enough to pull them out of class. I've heard of organizations, one in particular, that aims to empower Latinx leaders into high-paying jobs, right? But then they have Latinx employees who have no pay transparency within the organization and are being paid lower wages. You can promote or aim to promote community-led initiatives, community-led programs. You know, you really want to invest in community leadership, right? But then there's very few community members, if any, who have decision-making authority or influence on a board, for example. you could promote these incomplete narratives, right? And so I come from my own personal experience around cancer, but a public health background. And so there's this idea that patients of color do not want to participate in clinical trials because there's a mistrust of the medical system, right? What they do not say is that patients of color are disproportionately not asked to join clinical trials, or that the selection criteria is so, the norms and the assumptions around the selection criteria is really outdated, and it disproportionately excludes patients of color from participating. And so in the grant world, there could be a desire to fund community-led, people of color-led organizations, or to provide financial resources into communities, right? But then you have these very long, laborious application processes that create unnecessary barriers to getting that money. And so I have a friend of mine who is the executive director for a cancer organization, and she shared with me that there was like a multi-page application just to get like $50 of money for like COVID relief, right? I have another friend who's a leader in the philanthropy space, and she tells me that every time she goes to conferences, there's always somebody who says, you know, we would never ask Martin Luther King Jr. for an annual report, you know? But then their organization like mandates annual reports, right? And so there are also these hidden hands in the work, right? And so another example from the cancer space, and I'm sure in other industries as well, is that you can have major donors. They have the ability to earmark their funds for such and such cancer and such area of research. Cool, sounds good. But then how does that impact types of cancers or research for conditions that disproportionately impact people of color? Another hidden hand is that, you know, we want to pool financial resources to support communities of color, but then organizations that are led by people of color receive disproportionately less funding than their white counterparts. So this is the way that there's a new kind of authenticity gap in mission-driven work. And so then what happens in the gap, right? You lose trust, you lose talent, you lose partners, you lose credibility, right? You can lose information. If you're losing trust in partners and talent, right, then you don't have people who can speak up, right? You don't have people who can help organizations reach their intended impact. You can lose money. The cost of replacing people, the cost and the loss of potential funding, or relationships or partnerships, right? That becomes compromised because of the loss of credibility. And of course, you can lose impacts, because can you truly be making the impact that you seek with the talent missing and the partners missing from the table? So all this reminds me of one of my favorite James Baldwin quotations, where he says, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." But you know, it doesn't have to be this way, right? If we can identify these gaps, if we can see what creates these gaps within our work, within our organizations, within our industry, then we know better what needs to be filled and how. But before we get to those solutions, I want to delve into a little bit of like how this authenticity gap happens in the first place, right? And especially in mission-driven organizations or in nonprofit organizations. And so again, I've been in a lot of nonprofit spaces, right? And I feel like there's something special about this environment when you know that your efforts are going towards something good, like something that you believe in, right? And so maybe you feel like in this type of work, like you can have a little bit more space to be yourself, right? Whether that's your identity or your lifestyle. You can have impact in the things that you're doing, right? You can create meaningful careers way beyond the kind of transactional nature of corporate widget making. Apologies to the for-profit sponsors in here. But there's like a different set of kind of intentions and expectations that we have, especially when we come into this kind of mission-driven work, like work that we really want to make a difference in the world. And then sometimes that experience doesn't match those expectations. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was really curious. I'm writing a book around this. And I'm like, I wonder if it's just me, if I had like more intense experiences of racial microaggressions and kind of mission-driven work. And a bunch of people, I got dozens of messages and stories, all types of stuff. And this is the poll results, where most people are saying that they're having a harder time as a professional of color in these mission-driven spaces, right? And so before we get into some examples of that, let's define that. And so for people who aren't familiar, microaggressions, it's a term that was first developed about 50 years ago in the 1970s. There's been a lot of work on it since. But at its foundation, it's these everyday slights, indignities, put-downs, insults that people of color, women, queer folks, people with disabilities, people who have some type of identity that's been marginalized by our society or our companies in some way, shape, and fashion. It's about their day-to-day interactions and those kind of frictions with the identity with other people, and typically people who occupy kind of like the dominant identity of that space. And so what are some examples of microaggressions, right? I think an easy one is like the hair thing or pronunciation of names. But I want to get into the types of microaggressions that are a little bit more structural, right? It's kind of in the way, in the culture of how we work, right? And so having your judgment questioned, even in your own area of expertise, needing to provide more evidence of your competence than other people do, being addressed in a less than professional way, being mistaken for someone who's at a much lower level than you are, right? These are some examples of just kind of the culture of work that creates microaggressions for folks of color and people who are underrepresented. Your work contributions are ignored, or maybe they're attributed to someone else. Some people deny their racism. I'm not racist. I am married to insert identity here, right? My best friend is insert identity here. I am not racist. And I think what's interesting about mission-driven work is that some people use their proximity to those communities to say, I'm doing this work, right? There's no way I'm racist. I'm trying to like educate kids. Or I'm participating in that work in some way, right? You can have your expertise underutilized, right? You can see conflict between diversity and having high standards. There are a lot of people who believe that if we invite more women, more folks of color, that's going to compromise the high standards that we have in our organization, right? There's another one too, because I think for all this talk about like quiet quitting, have y'all heard this? Y'all been in the know of these conversations? What I'm most interested in is like quiet termination, right? The subtle ways that people get pushed out of their roles. I mean, they still have them, but they don't have influence. They're kind of siloed into ways where their work doesn't really touch or influence the organization, right? Their influence becomes minimized in some way. Here's another interesting one. If you ever see, and we talk about this as we talk about representation and leadership, that the more senior you go, or like kind of higher up you go in an organization, there's less representation of women, folks of color, et cetera, right? And so I think for a lot of people when they're entering organizations, there's this idea if you have more leadership, you can have more influence and you can like really make a difference. But there's this really interesting phenomenon that's being studied right now called the pet to threat phenomenon, right? And it's this dynamic that is experienced by professionals of color in these high leadership positions. They're brought in, they're initially seen as really likable, moldable novices, but then as soon as you exert any type of influence or authority that you have earned in your role, that increased agency is perceived as a threat to the status quo. So all of this doesn't like come from nowhere, right? This is not about like bad people or bad apples in the system, right? But more specifically, these like structured ways that we can build in and normalize bias in our workplace culture, right? So you can fail to hire for competency in these types of conversations, diversity, equity, inclusion issues. You can feel like fragility in even having this discussion where you just like, why are we talking about race? Why are we talking about gender or disability or sexuality? You know, that is a way where we silence change because we can't even talk about it, right? Maybe you have little to no clarity in your stated and shared expectations on what it means to be inclusive, right? Little to no accountability mechanisms for inclusion or anti-racism initiatives within your work. Little to no representation of people of color in positions of leadership. Maybe you don't have any norms on what racial conflict looks like and how to resolve that. Maybe you have a bias for intention and documentation. And I was chatting with a friend who worked at a nonprofit organization. There were 2 Korean women on the team, and they would always confuse them, right? So inviting person A to a meeting that person B was supposed to be at, and vice versa, right? And so then if you have a process where it's like, if I say I'm experiencing discrimination, and then you say, can you prove it? How do you prove that? Oh, it's just a calendar mix-up. Really, with just us 2, right? Our names aren't even similar. It's not like a typo, right? And so if you have this like bias for, oh, this person didn't mean it, or oh, can you give me some documentation to prove it? These are the structural ways that we build in and normalize bias, right? If there's no recourse in HR complaints, or even if you don't have cultural responsiveness to your performance reviews or evaluations. And so studies have shown that women, for example, are more harshly judged on their tone and style in their performance reviews, but not in the actual work that they do. And so I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with people who get all these stellar remarks, 5 out of 5 on their work performance, and they're just like, no, people just don't like working with you. Really? My work is amazing, right? My CRM is clean. Like, but you're mean. Okay. And so then when you, actually, can I tell you a quick story? I was going to tell you this, but it's on my heart, so I have to share. I went to this writing retreat, okay? There's 12 people in this writing group. I had a wonderful time the entire week. People are sharing their writing. I'm giving feedback. I'm sharing my writing. They're giving good feedback. I'm having a good time. Second to last day, I hear this conversation happened. I did not know until the program was over. But there was this woman who complained to the facilitator of the workshop that there was someone in the class who wouldn't give her eye contact. And I'm listening to the story like, who? And she's like, you. And I'm like, wait, what? And so I'm just kind of like doing my own thing. I'm like working on my stuff. I'm chatting with whoever I'm chatting with. And there's this person who's having this whole other experience who sees introversion as like an affront to her, or to see introversion as an attitude. Isn't that wild? Anyway. And so just imagine if she was in a position of power, right? If she was my manager and not just a peer in a random class in some random island off the coast of Canada. Truly, I cannot put this place on the map, right? Like if she had actual power over me, that would have had an impact on my career, my experience in that space. And so what I heard is that the facilitator said, Jodi Ann doesn't owe you eye contact. She does not owe you friendship. And she cried. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to share that. And so another way is when we want to advocate for ourselves. So let's just say she was my manager, and I'm like, hey, this is a little off, isn't it? You know? And so another dynamic of that is this wonderful acronym. It is not mine. Dr. Jennifer Freed in 1997 or something created this. But this acronym called DARVO, right? And it's a way that we gaslight people and cause them to question the reality of their own experiences, right? Deny, attack, reverse the victim, and the offender. So I, Jody Ann, say, hey, this thing is a little off. Maybe it's race-related, et cetera. They say, this has nothing to do with your race, right? Deny. You're being too sensitive. You don't understand. You don't know the needs of the organization, the priorities of what we're doing. Attack. And then there's this way that you reverse the victim of the offender, where it can sound like, I'm just trying to help you, right? I want you to be successful here, right? Are you trying to compromise our work? You know, we could lose funding, and you're like, wait, maybe I shouldn't have said anything, okay? You know, and as I've been talking with more and more people who are engaging with this and dealing with this in their organizations, one person shared a story with me, and she said this. She said, I've never seen an organization so actively crush its Black talent. You know, it doesn't have to be this way, right? If organizational leaders, which I know many of you are here today, own the responsibility to create an environment that draws out our authenticity, when the culture of your organization, the culture of the organization begs for our authenticity, then we don't need these like imprecise words to do that work, right? We're creating new pathways, right? And we can do so by addressing structural problems with structural solutions. You know, even by the conversation that we're having today, you know, the work that you're doing as part of your organizations, you can have an active role in creating these new pathways, right? A new normal for making diversity, equity, and inclusion principles a part of your everyday work, no matter where you sit in the organization. And so when you think about how authenticity and the myth of it shows up in your own organization, you have an opportunity to be direct and clear about what should happen next. And so being a part of AASP, right? Spend this summit connecting with folks, unpacking how these dynamics are present in your organizations, and seize the opportunity to be a part of those solutions. You know, that's really like one of the things that I love most about professional associations is that it's like filled with so many people who are making a serious commitment to supporting each other, to grow your expertise, to learn from each other, to become partners with each other as you advance the field in a number of ways. And with your leadership combined, no matter where you are in your organizations, what your role is, you can bring inclusion principles to scale, opening new pathways to make a real impact in your organizations across the country, you know, across the world. And so how can we close this authenticity gap, right? My vision is to see differences as assets, not liabilities, right? Let's have transparency about our diversity, transparency about our culture, and not prioritize assimilation. Let's reward these differences, not punish them. See each other as partners, not pets. Let's celebrate our differences, not interrogating them. Like, where are you really from, you know? And how can this work be supported? The people who are on the front lines of this be supported and not burdened with creating their own solutions, right? Leverage the tools at your disposal. And I can hear you saying, maybe there's some folks in the room, you know, but Jody Ann, I'm just, insert job title here that's not directly client-facing or related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, that doesn't stop you from advocating for, influencing, or leading within your sphere of influence. You know, we can rethink authenticity as not something employees are bringing to their companies, but rather what companies are bringing to their employees. And so with that spirit, I have 15 minutes left. Nudge your neighbor and say, listen, she's getting to the good part. I want to leave you with a few ideas. I want to kind of rethink some advice that we have about what it means to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion principles with authenticity at its core. And so just join me as I walk you through a few unconventional thoughts. Are you ready? Okay. There's 8 of them. I hear paper rumbling. It'll be good. When you take notes, don't just write what I'm saying. As things come up, you're like, oh yeah, we could do this and we can try this, right? Like engage in what I'm talking about. Okay. I want you to be disruptive. Do not fit in. Talk too much. Get messy. Be difficult to understand. Do less. Be stubborn. Oh, the one I missed was make things up. All right, let me explain. So, be disruptive. So a few years ago, I took to calling myself a disruptor because I feel like most of you here today, right? There has not been a single classroom or job that I have had where someone did not call me disruptive, okay? In a pejorative sense, right? But as people committed to creating a space for those who for too long have been pushed to the margins, aren't we supposed to be disruptive? You know, to disrupt racism, homophobia, sexism, ableism, ageism, and other forms of discrimination that have and continue to create the rules and norms that say that I shouldn't be here? You know, it's not just the tech bros who get to be disruptive, right? For many of us, we are where we stand in our professional and personal lives specifically because of the disruption caused by those in our families, you know, in our communities, and society at large. So we praise these disruptors now, right? We thank these disruptors now. We celebrate them individually as icons who push beyond their imaginations to create a more just reality that they themselves might not have experienced in their own lifetimes. We remember them for the impact they've made on all of us, that where we are today is different and hopefully better because of them. But we must also remember that disruption is not easy, glamorous work, right? They too struggled and doubted themselves, made missteps, and perhaps some setbacks. Resilience against the doubt, right, and mistakes, it takes a community of people who don't necessarily have to be like-minded in process, right? But more importantly, are like-minded in purpose. We can sustain each other in the work of disruption because we share a vision that more can be possible for all of us when diversity, equity, and inclusion becomes grounded in our professional lives. So I want you to be disruptive in everything that you do, right? Use the energy of disruption to fuel your organizations to create the diverse and inclusive environments we all need to thrive. Do not fit in. We spend a large chunk of our developmental lives worrying about fitting in. As kids, all we want to do is not stick out, right? To be like everyone else with the goal of being accepted by our peers. I think there are aspects of that that never leave us really, right? Partly because the need to belong is foundational to the human condition. And so even as adults who undoubtedly have a much greater sense of self than we did as kids, right, we still want to belong. But belonging doesn't mean fitting in. Belonging at work means feeling secure and supported. It means having a sense of inclusion and acceptance no matter your identity. Belonging is the outcome of an organizational culture that does the work to make sure that you are able to fully engage with this full, authentic self without chronic bias and exclusion. So the work that you all do in your companies can help make that real for yourselves and for so many others. The work of fitting in, on the other hand, often requires that we make ourselves small. We have to abandon maybe even the most treasured parts of ourselves to make room for the ways of being that allow us to be seen, heard, and valued. And so code switching and covering and other strategies that we may use to downplay our differences has had its place in the ways that we survive our professional environments. But this doesn't have to be the case. As leaders in your company, you've been charged to keep your companies accountable to its mission, to make them amazing places to work for everyone in their full authenticity. And so do not fit in. What makes us unique can be what drives our success, not what compromises it. And so use your talents that you can hone collectively in your companies and with your peers here today to create and advocate for an organizational culture with a reputation to be the place that what makes you different, what makes you stand out, is celebrated and rewarded. Make things up, right? So a couple years ago, when an MRI found a tumor growing inside of my spinal cord, right, it was the first major health crisis I've ever had. I had no clue how to handle it or what even to expect from my employer. I had no answers about my prognosis. And it turns out I didn't need to have those answers because the president didn't ask me any questions, the president of my organization. Instead, she let me determine how and when I wanted to notify my colleagues. She offered that my immediate manager, they do the work to figure out the details of my work handoff so I could focus on my health. And most impactfully, she told me that I could take the time away that I needed as soon as I needed it. And all the logistics about my disability leave could absolutely be handled later. Anyone who's ever done or filled out paperwork for short-term disability leave, it is not easy. And it's harder when you're scared. It's harder when you're sick. And so fast forward a few months, my short-term disability benefit was going to expire. And honestly, I was not physically, mentally, emotionally ready to go back to work. But financially, I couldn't afford not to, right? My organizational leaders, they weren't afraid to try something new. They reached out beyond what was HR compliant, and they took my situation as an opportunity to create a new inclusive policy for the whole organization. So they allowed other employees to donate their paid time off to other people, right? And so it made it possible for me to have the support that I needed, right? They extended my disability leave, and I was still able to have my full salary. For those who don't know, when you're on disability leave, you only get a portion of your salary, which is weird because I have medical bills, right? Our employee policies, or our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, oftentimes they just kind of sort of step outside of our comfort zone, right? Or they just kind of tap it a little bit, right? They're not really shaking things up. But I want you to absolutely make things up, right? Go big. Double down on your commitments. Push beyond what is compliant. Push beyond what you even think is possible. Think deeply and critically about your department, your role, your sphere of influence. What new pathways can you create to bring greater equity into your work, to close the authenticity gap between your intentions and your impact, your purpose, right, and your process? What can you invest in to create a new normal? Change happens and sustains when it has enough energy and enough time to transform. Talk too much. I talk a lot, obviously. Too often for people of color, our success and survival at work depends on our silence, not pushing boundaries, not speaking up, not making anyone else uncomfortable, even in the face of our own discomfort. And despite what anyone else might say about how much they appreciate this fresh perspective that we can bring, we might find, more often than not, this fresh perspective compromises our reputation, our opportunities in standing at work. And so what drives this silence is experience. Individually and collectively, that's proven this to be true. And even in circumstances when we can actually be ourselves, when we can ask questions, when we can speak up and share our genuine ideas that leverage our full talents, the fear of repercussions alone can keep us silent. It's moments like these when I turn to the work and legacy of writer, poet, activist Audre Lorde. She said, and I quote here, "When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it's better to speak." As a community of leaders who are looking to change the status quo, to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in measurable ways, right now, is there a risk to speak up? Absolutely. Change is hard for a reason. But you are a community of leaders. Collectively, you have everything that you need to offset that risk. Deepen your allyship for each other across different dimensions of our diversity. And so speak up. Talk too much. Talk about what's needed to actually fulfill your mission. You and your peers represent the greatest asset your organizations have. It's people power. And so Audre Lorde also reminds us that, quote, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid." And so for everyone in this room, and especially those who have the most institutional power within your organizations, dare to be powerful in the service of diversity, inclusion, authenticity. Get messy. So one thing that we all have in common, no matter who we are or where we come from, is that we are all messy. Our identities are complicated. They mean different things in different situations, right? Parts of who we are might matter a great deal to us in one room, and then much less in another. But for me, as a Black woman living with a disability, in all the ways that these identities become more and less salient, more or less foregrounded in my everyday experiences, I am still all of those things and more. And to reach my full potential, I need to be all those things and more in everything that I do, even at work. And so intersectionality is a concept that was developed by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. It speaks to this exactly, that we are more than one thing. Our identities layer and compound and must be institutionally protected accordingly. They create new meanings and realities for our lives that might be different from those who are even the most similar to us. And so there's a history of social movement and diversity, equity, and inclusion work that did not always account for this well. And in many cases, they still don't, right? So sometimes with the best intentions, we sacrifice those who are a part of us because we fear that they might be too different or too complicated. And what they need and advocate for fits less neatly in our narratives. Too many nuances to fit on a sign. And so when our hyphenated identities are too much to explain who we all are, we fear it might compromise how fast we can go and what we can achieve. And so instead, we've historically looked to this kind of like first step in, what might be good enough for now, right? And we make this promise of reaching back, and sometimes we don't. So I'll give you a quick example. You know, I was at an event some time ago, and I was chatting with another woman who identified as someone who's living with a disability, right? So we're both kind of talking about what it's like to navigate these public spaces as people who have physical disabilities that may or may not be visible to some people. And so she talked about how great it was to be in Seattle now. There are all these queer bars and clubs and social spaces that she could be in. She felt seen and centered and celebrated as a queer woman. But she was so frustrated because there are already so few spaces like that. And then when you match like her being queer and then having a physical disability, it's even less because there's so many few spaces that celebrate queerness that she can physically be in. Right? And so there's a seminal Black feminist book titled, "All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave." The brave spaces hold those of us who are still left in the margins, even as inclusion becomes a greater part of our professional lives. But what encourages me about our social movements today and the path forward in your companies and organizations through your leadership is the work to break those silos between us. And so as leaders, what you advocate for must have this intersectionality at its core. Final points. I want you to be difficult to understand. When things get too complicated for too many people, our inclination is to standardize. We then establish and maintain ways for that standardization to sustain. And so that can sometimes backfire, right? And we create systems that start to become too resistant to change. I'll give you an example. A colleague of mine once shared that at her company, it took like 2 years for them to approve adding pronouns into your email signature. So just imagine this. All the work to just advocate that it's needed, plus the logistical work to like put it in the email and all your campus badges, that's a long time. And so if the systems that you need to make inclusion a reality aren't responsive, then your systems, even the slow ones, are still broken. You don't need less complex ideas. You need more robust and responsive systems. So as intersectionality continues to take hold in how we approach and address inclusion work, these like rudimentary binaries of black and white, man and woman, gay and straight, able, disabled, will continue to break. And thankfully so. You know, as nonprofit leaders, it's our work to leave no one in the margins. And to do so, our concepts, language, and terminology, it will change over time, and it'll vary across place as well. As your companies brave conversations about culture, identity, representation, fairness, and belonging, you must gain a fluency in how these values and ideas are expressed across the world. That on top of an ever-changing landscape of inclusion work, it is a very tall order, right? But it is required for the mission and goals that you set. And so with the goal to make your companies amazing places to work for everyone, everywhere, your different offices, right, it might need different things to get on the same page. But that doesn't mean standardization, and it doesn't mean stagnation. But if you're difficult to understand, if you allow for more complex and courageous conversations, then your inclusion goals are absolutely possible. I want you to do less, much less. That's what's so transformative about professional associations and building up a network of peers. You're in this work together. Across all of your offices, organizations, all across the world, you have people who see you, support you, understand you, and can push you beyond what even you thought was possible in this work. And it's only possible if you aim to do less alone so we can do more work together. And for my last point, I want you to be stubborn. Be very, very, very stubborn. Every single person in this room knows this to their core, that establishing diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies on top of your other job functions is incredibly difficult and trying work. Besides doing this work in our professional lives, for many of us, it's mirrored elsewhere, in our social spaces, in our children's schools, in our doctor's offices, and more. I know you must be tired because I am tired. But if we're stubborn about creating a culture of authenticity, we will see the change we're all aiming for. Inclusion work is hard. But as leaders, you're already in charge of hard things. And doing it together absolutely will lighten the load. No, we don't have to burn out in this work, but instead pass the torch to keep that fire going. I'm so happy to be a part of your community and this work. Thank you so much for having me here. I hope you have an absolutely amazing and transformative conference as you build and explore new pathways to the future. Thank you.
I immediately thought that that's not, a lot of those qualities are exhibited in our space already. Probably not a stretch for us to be talkative and stubborn and disruptive. I think that I get called that almost weekly. But in regards to this topic, we're talking about a world that we are all deeply invested and embedded in. And thank you very much, Yodianne, for giving us that perspective and a really rich understanding of the scope of what's involved. I also want to thank Blackbaud for being our premier sponsor and providing us this opportunity to dig deep into ourselves and our workplaces. And I know that we've got to get boogieing because we have breakout starting. 2:30, head on out. They're all around you. And then don't forget the President's Reception at 5:30. Enjoy.